Hello and welcome back. Today we're looking at the first study scene of Faust. So Faust returns from his day in the park during Easter, where he was walking with Wagner in our last scene outside the city gate, and he returns to his study with the poodle that they picked up at the end of last scene. As he walks into his study, his attention is divided between his high, ethereal thoughts and the very earthy groundedness of having a poodle with him. I have forsaken field and meadow, now sunken deep in darkness, when, to boding sacred awe, night's shadow wakes the better self in men. And so he wants to turn to reflection, but the dog keeps dragging him back to reality by barking. "Where are you running, poodle? Cease your riot!" And as he returns to his study, his wonderful feelings of the day begin to fade away with the coming night. We noticed how today was a new day for him. He felt resurrected back in the night scene. He was awakened to a new desire to live. And we saw that as he walked outside the city gate and experienced nature and talked about how he wanted to fly away. But now that he's back in his study in the night, he's beginning to feel a damper on his spirits. But oh, though my resolve grows ever stronger, I feel contentment welling from my soul no longer. Yet why must the flood so soon run dry, and we be left again in thirst to lie? I have had proof of it in such full measure. Still for this lack there's compensation, the supernatural we learn to treasure. We come to long for revelation, which nowhere burns so finely, so unflawed as in the gospel of our Lord. So he turns to translating the Bible as a way to continue to renew his spirits and his inspiration. We might notice that this is, in some ways, an attempt to cling on to the nostalgia he was experiencing at the end of the night scene. He had given up hope on everything in life and began to feel that life was absolutely useless and there was no point in living anymore when he heard the bells of Easter and he heard the Easter choir. And in that moment, he was reborn, not because of the faith that it instilled in him, because he still didn't believe, but because of the return to his childlike feeling. There are lots of examples of this idea in literature. You might be familiar with Marcel Proust, who wrote Le Recherche de Temps Perdu, or The Remembrance of Times Past, or Things Lost. And in that book, Proust begins by drinking tea and eating a Madeleine cookie, and the combined taste of those two things awakens in him this memory of his childhood. And he loves that feeling of nostalgia, and so he continues to seek it and try to find it again and again and again and restore it. C.S. Lewis talks about a similar experience in his book Surprised by Joy, this sudden awakening of a childlike nostalgia, which is sweet and bitter at the same time. And Faust's experience in the original night scene was similar to this. He was awakened back to the joy of his childhood and felt like living again. However, the problem with this feeling is it's not something that you can necessarily tack down. It's not something that you can just grab and hold on to. In fact, the more you try to hold on to it, the less you experience it. So perhaps as Faust attempts to renew that nostalgia which he experienced hearing the choir and the church bells by translating the Bible, we already kind of get the feeling that this isn't going to work. It's not going to last very long for him. But his translation is very interesting and definitely calls up for us one of the key themes of Faust. Not only does Faust translate the Bible into German, but he definitely puts a very liberal interpretation on it. The passage he's translating here is the beginning of the Gospel of John. He says, "In the beginning was the Word," thus runs the text. "Who helps me on? Already I'm perplexed. I cannot grant the Word such sovereign merit. I must translate it in a different way, if I'm indeed illumined by the Spirit." And he goes on through this progression, continually deciding that his translation does not convey the idea that he thinks it should convey. And so he changes it from "in the beginning was the Word" to "in the beginning was the sense" to "in the beginning was the force" to "in the beginning was the deed." Word, sense, force, deed. What does this progression mean and where does it come from? And why does he throw out word and sense and force and finally settle on deed? In order to understand what he's doing here, we should probably start with what his original text means, the text that he's translating. So the text he's translating begins like this. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Word here refers to the creative force behind the universe, and as the text goes on, it elaborates a little bit. And the Word was made flesh, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So in the original theological context, Word is not only the message of God to humanity, but it's the embodiment of his creative power. It is Jesus, the Christ, the message of God to humanity. But it's also alluding to an older text, the very beginning of the Old Testament of the Bible, the book of Genesis, which tells the story of the creation and the beginnings. It starts out, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." You hear the echoes between the two. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning, God. Obviously, the Gospel of John is pulling from this earlier text. And the book of Genesis continues with the description of the creation of the world, which goes like this. "And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day." And it repeats this pattern through the creation of the entire world, in which God speaks, uses his word, which creates. And so it becomes clear why in the Gospel of John, it talks about Word as the creative force of God. But now back to Faust. Faust doesn't like the idea that the Word is the creative force behind the universe. He doesn't like the term Word to have such sovereign merit, as he says. And his reason is this. He has a problem with the idea that language, or words, or terms, or labels can really carry that much power. How can a word be so powerful? After all, when I say a word, it conveys an idea to you, but not very clearly. Language is a medium through which I translate my thoughts into speech, and that speech is then received in your ear, and then that speech is translated into thoughts in your head. That's a lot of steps, and usually something's lost between what I say and what you receive. You've probably had the experience of being misunderstood before, where you say something that seems perfectly clear to you, but the other person doesn't think so. Why do we fail to understand each other sometimes? There are many reasons, but one of the reasons we fail to understand each other sometimes is the fact that our words cannot perfectly convey meaning. If I were to say, for example, the word dog, you probably wouldn't have the exact same image in your mind as I do. In fact, it's almost certain you wouldn't. And let's say we got a crowded auditorium full of people and we said the word dog to all of them. They would probably each have a different image in their mind of what that means. Although they'd all be related, although they probably would all have similarities, no two images would be exactly the same. So how can I precisely convey a more clear image or idea into someone else? So Faust decides to go beyond simply the word, the label, the title, and go deeper into the meaning behind those words, the meaning behind those labels and those titles, rather the sense. Maybe a thing isn't just what it's called, but maybe a thing is closer to its description. However, even a description of a thing, even a definition of a thing, even the sense of the label is not enough to fully, truly understand what that thing is. It's still very external, just the discussion of the idea. So Faust takes one more step. Let's go beyond sense. Let's go to force. A synonym for force would be power. So force is the power of the thing. Now, all things have a kind of power, whether it be an active or a passive kind of power. For example, the chair that I'm sitting in has the power to support me. That's its force. We might also consider this its potential. However, Faust is still not satisfied with the term force because just because something has potential doesn't mean that's what it truly becomes. I might have had the potential to become a world-renowned violinist as a child, but I never took any music lessons, so I didn't. So I can just say, well, I'm a violinist. No, I can't. It's only once we get to the point where the thing is actually proven. And how does that happen? Through action. And that's why Faust concludes with, "In the beginning was the deed." It's the action, the fulfillment of that potential, that makes a thing what it truly is. And Faust is satisfied with that definition. To put it another way, I might be standing in a boat watching you drown. And as you're drowning and splashing in the water, I lean over the boat and I say, "Life preserver!" And you wouldn't appreciate that very much, because just the name of the thing does you no good. If I were to shout over the side, "It's that floaty thing that helps you keep from sinking!" Just because you know what the term means doesn't necessarily give you anything. I could even hold it up and say, "Here it is! It has the potential to float, it has buoyancy, look how useful this would be!" And it still does you no good until I actually throw it in and it performs its action. Faust is going to continue to discuss this throughout the entire play. So is Mephistopheles. The idea that words and language and speech are really very shallow and very hollow and very meaningless is a key idea to the play. Faust is looking for more. He wants something more than simply talk, than simply words, than simply books. He wants to dive deep and truly experience. And this is going to feed into our deal later on with the devil. The idea that if Faust can truly experience life, then he'll be satisfied. We'll find that Mephistopheles has a slightly different take on language. He does recognize its shallowness, but he also enjoys shallowness, because, after all, he is the devil, and what's more fun than manipulating people using language? Faust's return to translation in order to win back those nostalgic feelings is cut short by the poodle. The poodle is no longer simply barking, but now is transforming into a giant demon dog. This is distracting. But what is this, I say? Could this occur in the natural way? Is it real or some shadow fraud? How my poodle grows long and broad. See him hugely swell and rise. This is not canine shape or size. What have I brought into the house? An incubus? So now he gets to do a battle with the monster poodle, which is pretty exciting. He grabs his book of elemental magic and flips through and begins to try to blast the dog with elemental magic. In the midst of all of this, the spirits begin to cry out from the hallway. "One is caught in there, you hear? No one follow, all keep clear. Like a trapped fox, there shrinks some wily old hell's lynx. But pay heed, upward soar, downward flow, to and fro, soon he'll be freed. There's tricks to show him, aid to be tendered. We all here owe him for favors rendered." These spirits all say that they've had favors rendered by this demon before. They are in some ways in debt to him. So who are all these spirits and where in the world did they come from? As we continue to read Goethe, we'll notice that there are sort of fairy spirits that just kind of float here and there and everywhere in the air around us. We could say that maybe they're always there and we just don't notice them. Faust hasn't seen them before, but they begin to sing when Mephistopheles is trapped. Or we could perhaps draw the conclusion that these are Mephistopheles' servants, and they're doing his bidding and his will. We'll examine that a little bit more closely in just a moment. In any case, Faust is using the spell of four, which is the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. And he evokes power over each of the kind of associated spirits. So there's the salamander associated with the fire, there's the undinole associated with the water, a sylph associated with the air, and incubus or hobgoblin associated with the earth. However, it's not one of these, it's something more hellish. So, how do you beat a demon? Well, you flash up the sign of the Trinity and the crucifix. And at the sight of these, the huge demon dog swells up and kind of explodes into a puff of vapor or smoke. It's very exciting. And out of all this steps Mephistopheles, looking like a traveling student. So we go from giant demon dog to casual student. It's quite the transformation, and it's odd that Faust suddenly is not very intimidated by Mephistopheles. After all, if you invite a demon into your library, it's probably going to be a little bit scary, but Faust is pretty cool with it. So this was at the poodle score. A traveling scholar? Most amusing case. He's super casual, and they start just chit-chatting back and forth. Why is Faust so casual with the devil? Well, part of it comes from the fact that his belief system is rather loose about the afterlife. And he is in his own element, surrounded by his books of magic and things, so maybe he feels a sense of control over Mephistopheles. He has summoned spirits before, as we saw in the night scene. He summoned up the earth spirit, and that was a semi-success at first. So maybe he feels like he has control over Mephistopheles. And Mephistopheles sure plays up that point too. The first thing, ironically, that Faust asks is, "What are you called?" And Mephistopheles thinks it's kind of a joke. "For one so down on the word, who so remote from everything external, past all appearance seeks the inmost kernel, this question seems a bit absurd." It's funny that Faust, who just spent all that time talking about how words, language, labels are insignificant and don't matter and not anything associated with reality, the very first question he asks Mephistopheles is, What are you called? What's your label? And Mephistopheles says, rightly so, that's stupid. Faust defends himself, however, by saying, well, normally labels don't matter, but with devils, usually you're named after your personality. Most of us are not named for our personality. Most of us are named even before we're born, or like me, if you happen to be named right after your birth, your parents look at you and say, you look like a Timothy. But even then, it's not our personality we're named for, but either a whim of our parents or perhaps a symbolic traditional name being passed down through a family, or something of interest to our parents and guardians. In any case, we don't usually get named based on who we are at our core. In fact, that's a fallacy to think that someone's name represents their personality. To say, all those Jessicas I've known, gotta watch out for them. It is interesting, though, how our experience will change our feelings towards a name. If you have somebody who's really annoyed you a lot, you will have strong feelings about that name, and probably won't you name your kid that. However, it's likely for you to name your child after your best friend, or someone that you really dearly love, like a grandmother. That's why all my children have Shakespeare allusions in their names. At this point, Mephistopheles does give him what he wants, and instead of just saying, my name is Mephistopheles, he goes on and talks about his nature, his core, the fact that he is part of the force for evil, which is in counterpoint to the force for good. Those two work side by side, although the good always over-dominates the bad. Mephistopheles says he always attempts to do evil, and his attempts at evil and bad are always counterworked by the good to come to good. And so they discuss chaos and creativity in these terms, dark and light. But then it gets really interesting because Mephistopheles asks Faust if he can leave. We shall talk more of this anon. For now, though, will you let me quit you? And Faust says, I don't know, I guess so. You can leave anytime you like. It's up to you. Can I forbid you or permit you? Now we've met, feel free to pay your further calls in any way. Here's the window, there the door, the chimney too may be conceded. Come and go as you like, Mephistopheles, it doesn't really matter. But Mephistopheles has a confession to make. I might as well own up. I am impeded of egress by a minor flaw, that druid's claw, there on the threshold center. So Mephistopheles is trapped in Faust's study. He can't leave because of the druid's claw, which is engraved in the threshold. Druid's claw is a pentagram or a symbol for magic. In any case, it's something holding Mephistopheles back. He can't walk over it. And he just happened to be able to get in because he was in the form of a poodle and there's a little crack in the pentagram and it just kind of worked out, but now he can't get back out. He's trapped. And Faust is eating this up. He says, how is a mind like yours betrayed? Oh man, you fool, you just bumbled into my trap, didn't you? I've got you imprisoned. I have chance to thank for it. So you are now a prisoner to me? That was a windfall. Quite unearned. And Faust continues to question him, and he finds out that Mephistopheles can't escape through a window or through the chimney or anything else because he has to go back out the same door he came in. It's the rules. And Faust's impression of this is interesting, because when Faust hears that the devil has to follow rules, his response is even hell with statutes paved? I am intrigued. Then with you gentlemen, a compact could, and safely too, be entered. And Mephistopheles replies, that which is promised shall be neatly rendered, and nothing stinted or subtracted, but this cannot be hastily transacted. We may consider it when next we meet. But now I urge you and entreat that for the nonce I might be gone. Who just brought up the idea of a deal with the devil there? It's not Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles has everything to gain from a deal with Faust, because after all, he made a bet with the Lord that he could win Faust's soul. And so when he comes down to Faust, you'd think he would say, hey, do you want to make a deal? But instead, it's Faust who brings it up. Why is that important? Not only that, but when Mephistopheles hears about the deal, he says, well, yeah, that's true, but don't worry about it. Let's not talk about that now. I want to get out of here. Why is he so eager to leave? And why does he brush off the idea of a deal, which we would think would be exactly what he wants? It might tie back into the whole being defeated as a poodle thing. It might tie back into the whole spirit singing in the hallway about, oh, one of our friends is trapped in there, oh no! Everything in this scene emphasizes Mephistopheles' powerlessness and Faust's empowerment. Faust feels like he has absolute control over Mephistopheles. But does he? poor, pitiful Mephistopheles has bumbled into this room, gotten himself trapped, and now he can't leave without Faust's help. Actually, just one page later, Faust falls asleep and Mephistopheles summons a rat to chew a hole through the pentagram and walks on out. It is really no trouble for him to escape from Faust. So why does he play it up so big as if he is so helpless here? Well, it certainly makes Faust feel like he has all the cards, like he has control of the situation. And so when he brings up the deal, he feels as though it's all his idea. And when Mephistopheles says, oh, I don't know, I don't really think it's that big of a deal, let's not do a deal now, I just really need to go for now. It makes Faust feel more eager to do it. You've heard of reverse psychology, right? Playing hard to get. So the more Faust thinks about it, the more Faust thinks he has control of the situation, the more likely he is to actually sell himself. And since he's got control of this situation, he says, no, I'm not letting you go. I'm gonna make you entertain me first. I want a big show. Something really exciting like Broadway. So Mephistopheles says, fine, I'll give you a show like you've never seen before. In this 1 hour, my friend, your senses will garner in more recompenses than in a year's monotony. What song the delicate spirits sing you, the pleasing pictures they will bring you. They are no idle magic game. Smell will be set to rapt enjoyment, the palate to superb employment, your touch not least be set aflame. No preparation needs our art. We are foregathered, let us start. And he summons the spirits. Notice the way he talks about this show. It is supposed to completely overwhelm Faust in all of his senses. Taste, smell, touch, sight, hearing. And as we read through the spirit's song, we see all of these senses coming to life. They begin by describing the chamber overhead melting away and Faust soaring up into the sky. And he's flying over islands and valleys, and he's looking down at these beautiful sights, and he's hearing this beautiful music, and watching these dances, and he's tasting this wine, and he's just experiencing, And we should probably note that this is in some ways at least a very superficial fulfillment of what he desired back in the outside the city gate scene. Sunward streaming, soars onto dreaming, islands skimming on wavelets gleaming, etc., etc. But notice that sunward streaming, he's following the sun, just like he wanted to do in the outside the city gate scene. However, we might also notice that this is still all a show. Faust is having all of his senses just explode all at once, but it's all fake. It's just a show. How is Faust going to feel about that when he wakes up? After all, we already saw that tension between show and actually experiencing the universe, not only in his speech where he discounts words and discussion of things and wants to go to the true action, but also earlier in the night scene when he looked at the sign of the macrocosm and said, psh, that's just a show, it's no good, and said, no, the earth spirit is the spirit of deeds, that's what I really need. All this show really does for him is overload his senses and knock him out. He falls asleep, and Mephistopheles uses that opportunity to escape, summoning a rat and getting out. And Faust wakes up again, looks around, and realizes he's been deluded. Am I then once again deluded? Thus fades from me the spirit's rich array. That in a cheating dream, the devil had intruded, and that a poodle slipped away. It was all a dream, it wasn't real, just a manipulation by Mephistopheles. Not at all satisfactory for the person who's seeking the true meaning behind it all. In the meantime, he lost both the devil and his poodle. That brings us to the end of this scene. Next time we'll look at the second study scene, which is where we actually make a deal with the devil. The Disney song for this first study scene is Friends on the Other Side.
Don't you disrespect me, little man. Don't you derogate or deride. I'm in your world now, not my world. But I've got friends on the other side. I've got friends on the other side. Well, I snuck into your study, but put your mind at ease, 'cause look at me so helpless, you could do anything you please. Oh, I can read your future, maybe change it around some too, as long as you will sell your soul. You were thinking about selling your soul, weren't you, Fausty? Make your wildest dreams come true. 'Cause I've got magic, you've got tragic, we got things we haven't tried. And I got friends on the other side. He's got friends on the other side.
Thanks for watching. Click up here to watch the previous episode, or down here to watch the next episode. And click here to subscribe. I'll see you next time when we look at the second study scene. So long. Don't invite in any strange dogs.